This is Andre Damon reporting for the World Socialist Web Site from Venice, Louisiana. We're here with Rick Steiner, who is a former professor of marine conservation at the University of Alaska, who is investigating the spill. Rick, could you tell us about your work here?
I was brought down here to take a quick, rapid assessment of the oil spill, get a sense of the severity and the extent of the injury, the impact, the effectiveness or lack thereof of the response effort.
What can you tell us about BP's response, in your opinion? Do you think it's been adequate, and is it right that they are leading the cleanup effort?
Well, in a sense, BP's problem here is having the deep well there in the first place. They had no business drilling out in 5,000 feet of water without an adequate contingency plan. That's the first thing. And the government didn't provide adequate oversight. Secondly, that they didn't have a contingency plan for a blowout like this is simply outrageous. The response to this spill, really there's no effective way to respond to a large marine oil spill. We have looked at these all throughout the world, and seldom is more than 10 or 15% of the oil spilled in a large-scale offshore oil spill recovered. It's just the fact of the matter. Once the oil's in the water, you've lost the battle. So they have put some boats out there with booms and skimmers and some people on the beach to try to get oil off the beach and that sort of thing. But really, it's an exercise in futility. They need 1,000 boats out there with booms and skimmers. There's a lot of boats still tied up here in the harbor. There's a lot of fishermen who have been put out of work, at least temporarily, by this, that are willing and able to get out there and pull boom around and see what they can get out of the water, and they haven't. So BP's response has been poor.
I see. Now, could you tell us about the relationship of BP to federal regulators and the role of the federal government in this spill?
Well, industry and government in the United States has had a very, very cozy relationship for far too long. It's sometimes the line between them is so blurred, it's difficult to even see. Particularly the oil industry and the former Bush administration they were so interlocked, you couldn't tell who was government and who was industry. And this is part of the problem. Regulation sort of atrophied to the extent that industry was self-policing offshore in these very dangerous extreme environments in the deep ocean, that they should have had excessive or extreme government regulation and oversight on. They just didn't. So basically the federal administration just let the industry do what they said was in the best interest of the industry financially, and there was little federal oversight, and therefore we have a blowout for which they did not have to have a contingency plan. That's outrageous. And here we are. Now the oil is still spewing out 3 weeks later into the Gulf of Mexico. This is one of the major marine oil spills in history, and there's a lot of damage.
And yet, despite all of this, BP is really heading the response of the entire country to the spill. Do you think that's right?
No. Obviously, the federal government needs to assert itself here on behalf of we, the people of the United States, and federalize, take control of this, and tell BP what it wants it to do. BP should not be running this response. They should be told what to do by the United States government on behalf of we, the people. That's the way it's supposed to work. The fact that it hasn't indicates that the federal government is being a little weak here in this situation. That's inexcusable.
Now, this event comes just a little over a month after Obama supported the law that would expand offshore drilling. And could you tell us about that? I mean, wasn't it sold as something that could never happen?
Yeah, timing is everything. Just a month ago, President Obama and his administration released an Outer Continental Shelf OCS drilling plan to open up vast new areas for Outer Continental Shelf oil and gas drilling in some precious areas in Alaska, the Arctic Ocean, off of Virginia, additional areas in the Gulf of Mexico that really should not be drilled, deep water as well. And while he was doing that, he was saying, we have learned that offshore oil and gas drilling does not cause oil spills. Whether he was fed that by industry and actually believed it or not is beyond me. But they knew at the time that there have been major blowouts from offshore rigs. There have been a history of problems with blowout preventers and 30 or 40 blowouts from offshore rigs over the last 20 years. It is a problem, it is a risk, it is a significant risk, and they downplayed it in order to give industry what it wanted, which was more drilling. That's not the way to our sustainable future. So the Obama administration is looking pretty bad right now. They need to immediately withdraw that OCS plan, pull it off the table, let it sit for a while they take a very hard look at this disaster, what caused it, what the response was, and whether other such rigs pose this kind of a risk. And the answer is obviously yes.
How would you characterize the Obama administration's relationship to the oil companies compared to that of the Bush administration?
You know, the surprising answer to that question is that they're virtually identical. I have seen very little substantive change between the current Obama administration's relationship with oil and gas and the former Bush administration and the former Clinton administration and the former Father Bush administration. They all tend to accommodate whatever the oil and gas companies want. There's just a little bit of change around the margins, but the basic energy policy is drill, drill, drill. You know, you guys give us all the oil and gas and gasoline we need and we'll be happy. That's got to change. We thought we had a fundamental change coming into American policy with the Obama folks, and energy policy certainly. We haven't seen it. They have had a year and a half almost to completely restructure the Minerals Management Service, and the dysfunctional agency that we've known it is for years. They haven't done it. They have the same people involved making the same bad decisions, doing poor inspections on offshore rigs that we've had for decades, and that's inexcusable. So it's been basically the same.
So could you tell us what the ecological impact of this spill will be?
It's too early to tell exactly what the ecological impact of the Deepwater Horizon spill will be, but we do know with this much oil going into a very productive marine environment and coastal environment, the impact will be significant and catastrophic for a number of components of the ecosystem. Right now, most of the impact is offshore and in the water column, so you don't see it on the beaches yet, too much. There is impact near shore. The oil is dispersed naturally and with chemical dispersants, which are in and of themselves toxic, and combining with oil, even more toxic. And so the oil was dispersed down into the water column by winds and waves and the chemicals. And so it is moved inshore into the sediments and such. And a hurricane comes through here in a month or two. All of that is going to be resuspended and pushed with storm surge right into the Louisiana Delta, the Mississippi River Delta, which is extremely productive nursery habitat for offshore fish and invertebrates and shrimp and such like that. The amount of oil inside Breton Sound, which is where they fish for menhaden and shrimp, is devastating. You know, they've had to close the fisheries. That's absolutely the appropriate thing to do. So it's too early to tell the long-term impact or the severity of the short-term impact, but we do know it's significant. A lot of it's offshore and down in the water. The other thing I'm really worried about here is the amount of oil that still hasn't reached the surface, that has come out of the blowout, but is still at depth and is drifting as a toxic plume in the Gulf of Mexico. We've known this from other deep water releases, not this deep and not this much oil, but this stuff can be entrained in the water and it can pop up in surprising places at surprising times. So we're in for some surprises, some unpleasant surprises out of this spill before it's over.
Could you tell us why are these dispersants being used if they're so toxic and so untested?
Well, the companies love this, the idea of using a chemical to spray on the surface of an oil slick to sink it in the water, because then it's out of sight, out of mind of the public. TV cameras can't see it. The public doesn't see it then anymore. So they love the notion of being able to spray hundreds of thousands of gallons of this toxic chemical on a surface slick to break it up into smaller bits down into the water. This is the big oil company playbook. PR, litigation protection, and image. You know, that's their playbook in a big oil spill like this.